Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret Reed, and I'm speaking from Vanderbilt University's Center for Technology Transfer and Commercialization. Welcome to today's Vanderbilt School of Medicine Basic Sciences Lab to Table event. The topic today is biotech entrepreneurship, and we have an outstanding panel of diverse individuals to speak to us on this topic. Before we get started, I'll introduce myself. I said that I work in the Center for Technology Transfer at Vanderbilt University, and my title is General Manager of Corporate Alliances. And I serve as the Scientific Collaboration Director for Ancora Innovation. Ancora is a partnership between Deerfield Management and Vanderbilt, and it's designed to move innovative research at Vanderbilt towards discovery of novel therapeutics. And it's an exciting time to be doing this, a very exciting time to be at Vanderbilt. We have a super panel today, and I'm going to pass the baton over to the panelists and ask them to introduce themselves before we launch into our discussion. I'll start with you, Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth Ann Stringer. I am a Nashville native who never thought that they would end up in Nashville, but there are lots of opportunities in Nashville in healthcare and in biotech industry. So it's a really great place to be. I am the Chief Scientific Officer at Nash Bio. We are a clinical imaging and genomic data and insights company that works with pharma companies, diagnostic, anyone in the life science space to really advance their R&D pipeline.
Thank you. Carrie?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carrie Dudek. I am the postdoc in the Aspire to Innovate program at Vanderbilt, as well as the co-founder and CEO of Upalinos. We are a therapeutics med device company focused on delivering novel technologies for the treatment of ischemic disorders, where we're able to endogenously restore blood flow to deprived tissues.
Great, thank you. And Shabnam?
Hi, I'm Shabnam. I'm currently a first-year internal medicine resident at Vanderbilt, and I serve as one of the innovation ambassadors between the Tech Transfer Office and the university and the medical center. And I'm one of the co-founders of THEA, which is a nonprofit that serves to help women use healthcare as a way, or use entrepreneurship as a way to change healthcare.
Great, thank you. So we're going to launch into some questions that I think will give some people some great insight into who we're speaking with today. And so we'll talk a bit about our entrepreneurial journeys. And I'd love for each of you to speak a bit about what motivated you to pursue a career in biotech entrepreneurship and kind of how you got started on that path. So I'll start again with Elizabeth.
So I knew in grad school that I did not want to continue the traditional path into academic research and be a professor at a Research One institution. Whether it was avoiding making the decision of what I wanted to do, or just the knowledge that I needed to have a few more experiences before I made that decision, I decided to go on and do a postdoc. I ended up at Stanford. My choosing Stanford was because I loved the research that I was doing at Stanford. But it ended up being a great place to be in the Bay. There are so many scientists who are taking what they're doing in academia and moving it outside of the academic walls. A lot of innovation happening there, and so I had the opportunity to see a different way of being a scientist than in the academic setting. And so I did my postdoc. It was fantastic. but knew that my next step really needed to be outside of academia. And so entrepreneurship and startups was really what I was interested in doing. And I moved back to Nashville and really just hit the pavement talking to anyone who would talk to me. And I think that that's key. And we'll talk about that, I think, throughout this discussion. But networking, meeting everyone, knowing what's going on in the community, who's got ideas, what sort of companies are being started. And I ended up meeting two guys who were starting a company in the pain and opioid space. And that just happened to be what my research specialty was in. And so really just the stars aligned. But I would also say it's not just dumb luck, you know, again, it's hard work, meeting with so many different people to get my foot in the door. And from there, had a great time founding and building Axial Healthcare, and really using real world data to solve problems within the healthcare space and use data in new ways that it was not intended maybe during its acquisition to be used. And then that led to where I am now in Nash Bio, continuing using real world data to solve some really pressing problems within healthcare and improving patient experience.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I think we're going to hear a lot of common themes, and I'm going to try to capture some of those. Shabnam, you can go next.
So my journey really began in college. I went to Penn and I was in a dual degree program there between the College of Arts and Sciences in Wharton, and it was called the Bachelor of Life Sciences and Management program. And there really you're trained to become a leader in the life sciences and biotech space. And so I had exposures to the industry and research both on the science and the business sides, did research in immuno-oncology at Kite Pharma, and then worked in biotech mergers and acquisitions initially in college, and then went back full-time to Centerview Partners. And there met great people. It's back to the point that Elizabeth brought up in terms of networking, met incredible entrepreneurs within the biotech space as they served as my clients. And I quickly realized that I wanted to be in their shoes, and a lot of them had that technical, scientific and clinical expertise. And I realized I really needed that. And so I went back to medical school, and I was at Cornell in New York City. And I continue to keep a foot in the biotech space within the Boston and New York communities by working in the venture capital space. And so did a stint with 5AM Ventures and 5AM Partners in New York, in Boston, in working in the crossover and public investing. And then with a small fund called Scion Life Sciences in New York City, more on the early stage side, helping with company creation in the autoimmune space. And so, as you can see, I've just been trying to navigate and working with biotech companies at different stages in their growth trajectory. And that's as part of my personal journey, figuring out and where within the continuum that I feel like that I fit in the most. Now I am working as an internal medicine resident at Vanderbilt, and still trying to continue to keep a foot in the biotech space and learn about the Nashville biotech ecosystem. Like Elizabeth said, talking to folks in the space. And I'm continuing. I've been here about 8-9 months, and I'm continuing to learn more and more about what Nashville has to offer from the biotech space.
That's fantastic. And we are really fortunate to have you in Nashville. It's always great when people come here who have had experiences in other cities and other environments. And it's something that we really want to foster in Nashville. And so it's just great to have both of you back here and being successful at what you do. So Carrie, share with us your journey.
Absolutely. I think you're right in that there'll be some common threads with all of our journeys, but similarly, mine started in college and into graduate school. I entered into a PhD program at Vanderbilt. Really, I was intrigued with pushing the envelope and innovative science and really pushing discoveries, and was able to get that opportunity at Vanderbilt and absolutely loved it. But similarly to Elizabeth, realized that I wanted to get out of the academic umbrella, if you will, really because I saw an opportunity and a need for the translation of those discoveries that were being made. And so with that, I started getting involved in some other areas, prompted both by Vanderbilt and the community. So I interned with a local healthcare startup, really became infiltrated into the local entrepreneurial community and fell in love and was completely supported by those that I was networking with there. And along the way, about the time I was finishing up my PhD, Vanderbilt actually developed a new program that I'm in, the Aspire to Innovate program, and it just was serendipitous and perfect timing and felt like an opportunity I couldn't walk away from. And so through that program, I was actually afforded the opportunity to commercialize technology that we're working with at UPalinos out from underneath Vanderbilt's umbrella. So that's been the journey there, and it's been a phenomenal one, supported by all of those within the local entrepreneurial community and all the way from academic through and through. So thank you.
Were you the first Aspire to Innovate fellow?
Yes, I was. There's now a second one following behind, but I was the first, yes.
And I think we have an application process going on right now for a third. So
yes, so if any of you in the audience are finishing up your PhD or an early postdoc and are interested, I think that deadline is coming up, but I highly, highly encourage you to apply. I'm happy to take questions offline about that as well.
great, thank you for that. Okay, so very interesting journeys, very different for everyone on this group. And so I'd like to switch gears a little bit and staying on the path of those journeys, talk about what you think about yourself, that how you cultivated the qualities in yourself to make you successful as an entrepreneur. And I'm sure that the answers for everyone are quite different, but I think it's nice to look back and think about, okay, what was it in me that made me want to go on this path? Other than I knew I didn't want to do, a straight academic career, but what else about yourself set you on this path? Carrie, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So for myself, I really love the constant challenges every day, and a little bit quicker pace than what is in the academic setting. As an entrepreneur, you're wearing, especially in the early stages where you have a really small team of maybe just one or two people like we do, you're wearing every hat, right? So you're wearing your scientist hat, you're wearing your business development hat, you're wearing your regulatory hat, and there are just really big challenges every day that make the day-to-day really interesting. And I love that aspect. I think for someone that's interested in the entrepreneur space, there's got to be a certain level of tenacity and being able to hear no a lot, and that being okay. And so there takes a level of grit in that respect. And just pushing forward. I mean, I've found, especially here locally, but more broadly in the field as well, networking, you'll probably hear that come up a lot. Like, it is really important to be networking with people and getting support from others, because you can't do it alone in a vacuum. And so just all of those things together made it a good fit for me personally.
Great. Elizabeth, any more thoughts on that?
Well, I do love what Carrie had to say. I do agree with like the quicker pace is fantastic. I loved that academia felt very slow, and agree with the grit, and yeah, you hear no all the time. I think we get a lot of that in science, right? If you're doing your experiments and every one of them works out, well, when I question that, that's not exactly how science works, right? We get so many failures, and so maybe that sets us up for success in entrepreneurship, because it is hearing no, many failures along the way. I think other things, being able to work with people and like working with people, teams that come together to get a company lifted and off the ground. I mean, you're talking about those scientists, clinicians, technologists, people with solid business backgrounds, right? All coming from different backgrounds, different skill sets, and you gotta like to work with people, and you gotta be fascinated by them and where they're coming from. I think that's really key, and something that I liked, which was a little bit different than the lab setting, where you're a little more isolated, I think. And also pragmatism, I think, is a huge one that comes to play a lot, particularly if you've been in academia. Pragmatism is not what you're relying on. You're constantly seeking truth, and in a different sort of way. And when it comes to entrepreneurism, time is of the essence. You got to make the best decision and move ahead really quickly. You can't get the answers to every question. You got to do the best you can with the time and resources you have, and move forward. And that works really well for me. And I love that, being able to be pragmatic, and pragmatic decisions sort of ruling the day.
I think those are some really important distinctions. Shabnam, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can comment on from the investor perspective and what qualities I and my team would be looking for in entrepreneurs, and a lot of what Carrie and Elizabeth said rings true. I think one is having the confidence to put your ego aside and knowing when to pivot is huge, because you can't get bogged down. It goes to the pragmatism point. You can't get bogged down on something that's just not going to work. And so knowing when to pivot is really important. Knowing your limitations and surrounding yourself with the people that fill in those gaps is key, because then from there you can learn how to speak both languages. Both the science and the business languages, I think, are really important, especially as a CEO of a company. Just, you don't have to be an expert, but just being able to speak to that. And then the third is being open to feedback is huge. Again, putting your ego aside and just allowing yourself to get that feedback from other entrepreneurs and from investors as well. I think people who are open to that are the most successful.
Like that a lot. I think, thinking about myself as a scientist, the concept of doing a killer experiment and failing fast, that wasn't in my mentality until I went into industry, and I realized there's huge value in that. And the sooner you can get the answer that tells you you're on the right track or not, the better off things are. Often expected in the film industry, and expected of entrepreneurs, ones that are successful. So these are great conversations, and again, a lot of good and common themes. So I'd like to switch gears a bit and talk more about specific technologies that are innovative and that we think are important for driving the future of entrepreneurship and biotech and success there, and how maybe we're leveraging some of those things in our own work. And we can touch on the biotech innovation pipeline, what the hot areas are, and not just the technologies, but therapeutic areas, and a bit about the continuity between academia and industry. That's a mouthful, but let's tackle those topics and see where that leads us. We can start with you, Elizabeth.
So I think we'll probably come back to AI because that is so huge right now. But maybe to start in another place of technology and how it's impacting us. I really think about how technology is allowing us to cut costs a lot. And so one area of this is a more recent initiative for Nash Bio, the Alliance for Genomic Discovery. So this is a consortium with pharma partners to whole genome sequence 250,000 subjects' DNA samples, with those samples linked to a de-identified version of their clinical records, and allowing us to really make associations between one's genes and disease progression. So you think about this massive resource of 250,000 subjects. About 20 years ago was when we had the first human whole genome sequence come out. And it took millions of dollars of investment just for one person's whole genome sequence. And fast forward 20 years, technology has shrunk that cost to on the order of hundreds of dollars as opposed to millions of dollars, right? And so technology is allowing us to produce these large data sets, again, that is really pushing the envelope of discovery and innovation and drug discovery, ability to have targeted precision therapeutics for patients. And so that to me is a key thing that I'm seeing right now with technology.
That's great. That's a great segue into perhaps something Shabnam can comment on. How is this technology shaping our approach to different therapeutic areas, and what are you seeing as the spaces where investors are most interested?
Yeah, I would say that I've seen a shift in focus for therapeutic areas from like about 5-6 years ago. Rare diseases were all the rage and everyone was trying to get a piece of that. And now the shift, I see a greater shift into larger indications in the metabolic disease space. I'm sure everyone has heard about the GLP-1s and those like those Ozempics of the world. And so cardiovascular disease and hepatology have certainly been areas where people are shifting their focus and leveraging AI and these sort of technologies to identify targets. Oncology will still always be the main space that's getting a lot of the funding for therapeutics development. And with the oncology space, I've seen a shift more looking away from T-cell focused targets and looking at non-T-cell targets. So looking at the innate immune system a bit more, biomarker development, increasing the specificity at which we target certain drugs. And then another is the antibody drug conjugate space and altering the payload there. So like you have protein degradation that has become a hot area. So using that as the payload, radiopharmaceuticals, the companies have been snatched up over the past few months. So I would say folks are focused in some of these areas at least at a high level, is what I've seen.
That's great input. Carrie, you're in a a very different space, I know, with the technology that you're working on. Any thoughts about how you're leveraging new technologies in the work that you all are doing?
Absolutely. So I agree with everything that Shabnam and Elizabeth touched on, obviously. I mean, in that space, really targeted drug delivery and small molecules and biologics broadly across indications are a big trend right now. In our space specifically, there's a lot of physical devices that are typically used. So we really are targeting peripheral artery disease as an indication, beachhead right now, as well as orthopedics. And in both of those spaces, you've got the physical hardware that's kind of the first line of treatment for patients. And there is this rising shift in use of biologics and small molecules to treat. So in our case, we're using a combination drug medical device to work with the body to grow its own blood vessels to create organically grown bypasses, essentially, instead of using stents and catheters to restore blood flow to lower extremities. So I think that there's a huge shift there. In talking with a lot of cardiologists, there's a really big interest. I think people feel like there's, you can make nominal improvements on the hardware pieces, but we've really got to see a rise in the use of biologics to create more impactful improvements in patient care. And to Elizabeth's point, those also translate to cost savings as well, which is a huge benefit to everyone. So
You're really right at the forefront regarding that continuity between academia and industry, and right at the cusp of the two. And Elizabeth, I know Nash Bio was founded and came out of Vanderbilt University's Medical Center. Do you want to speak a bit about the importance of that continuity?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think so much of early stage discovery is happening within academia. So yes, Nash Bio's history predates the founding of Nash Bio and goes back to actually my first year of grad school at Vanderbilt, and this whole concept of BioView and what could we do if we did link an individual's genes to their rich electronic health record, and wouldn't we be able to tailor drugs and therapeutics to the individual? But somebody had to make that investment, and VUMC so ahead of their time in terms of saying, we are actually going to make this investment and stand up this resource for our investigator community. And there was, almost a decade worth of discovery and research with BioView within the walls of VU and VUMC before it was. Well, we really need to get this outside of VU and VUMC. There's so much else that we can do. There's so much other science. And this is an asset that really needs to go beyond the walls. And so absolutely being in an innovative academic institution like VU and VUMC, and the recognition that this does need to get outside the academic walls is so huge. It is a struggle, and we hear from it from investigators from other medical centers, other universities who are trying to get their technology outside the academic walls. And so that recognition, I think, from VU and VUMC to create Nash Bio and a commercial arm for this amazing asset.
Yeah, that's a great story, and just shows the power of what we can do if we're willing to take that risk and push ahead. Shabnam, anything to add to that about the academia industry sort of relationship and how to foster that continuity? That's what space that I'm working in now, and it's challenging but really rewarding when you see something move forward.
Yes, and I'm so glad to see over the past few months I've been learning more and more about what opportunities there are and programs there are at VU and VUMC to foster that. And I think for me, what I found is that across the different institutions I've been at, that I think from the PhD and graduate school perspective, they've been really good. Medical centers and schools have been really good about promoting that. It's on the medical side that they have not been very good in terms of promoting entrepreneurship and talking about ways to get involved in that. And so that is something that I'm hoping to see, and I'm hoping to do as my role as an innovation ambassador is to help destigmatize the pharma and biotech space within the medical community, because I think it certainly has been villainized over the years. And so I think that's an area of continued improvement. It's been really good on the PhD side in terms of promoting that, but I think there's more to do on the medical side.
Well, we're really thrilled to have you an ambassador and working in that space, because I do see that need as well. Okay, anything else to add on that topic? I think that's a really good one and a rich one for this group.
Well, I will just say on the AI piece, going back to the Alliance for Genomic Discovery, the generation of all of this data and very, very large data sets. And so using classic models, old computation approaches, really doesn't cut it for data sets this size. And so I am really excited about what's happening with AI and the ability to bring in very, very large data sets and train models. And so we're not quite at the place where we're practicing that yet, but I do see that as a future and what's to come. And so a lot of excitement there. So I don't want to completely avoid the AI and where our focus is in the future.
Yeah, and I know that this is an area that we're really building out at Vanderbilt. And I think in the coming months, there's going to be more news about what we're doing on campus to foster interdisciplinary work in that space. And it's very exciting. What I'm seeing coming forward looks really, really interesting. And I think it's going to be super powerful for us in the future. All right. So we talked a bit about networking and relationships and the importance of that. And we've touched on the interdisciplinary collaboration and the importance of that. I think, Carrie, you're probably deep in the throes of that right now, and coming from a PhD program where you were, working in a lab, but you had your project and you were moving that forward, and now you're moving something that's much bigger and the potential to have a huge impact. And how do interdisciplinary relationships play a role with what you're doing? And I know that must be very different than where you started in your PhD.
That's absolutely true. I mean, collaboration is key in any discipline, but it's absolutely crucial as an early stage startup. Shabnam mentioned earlier, and I think it was a critical point, that you've got to know what you don't know sometimes and recognize that and bring in others to fill those gaps. So both as an internal team, but then also bringing in external experts and people that have the experience to fill your needs. So for example, for us, the nature of our technology makes our regulatory path quite arduous and lengthy. And that's an area that I've learned a great deal about, but certainly was not an expert in stepping into this role, and have really leaned into not only my advisors on my board, but as well as outside counsel and consultants. So knowing that is critical. I mean, you've got to think about everything when you're rolling into a startup, though. You've got to think about manufacturing. Again, an area that I knew little to nothing about, stepping in and really leaning on others that have that experience. And then I think it also goes back to rate and pace. I could sit here and try and teach myself the A to Z of all of it, but there's no time for that in a startup. You've got to move quickly and be able to pivot quickly. And I think bringing in collaborators and really taking advantage of those within your network, even if they're not formal collaborations, helps speed that process up and make sure that you can stay on pace with where you need to be.
So tell me a little bit about how you have and your team have identified these external experts, because they're not walking around, you're not bumping into them in the hallways here. So what resources have helped you identify those people?
Network,
Yeah.
number one. But also we've been fortunate enough to take part in a lot of entrepreneurial accelerators and programs. So we've participated in NSF's iCore program. We just wrapped up the National Institute of Aging's Startup Challenge Accelerator. We are leaning into programs like that. So while there are financial rewards at the end of those, I think what's even more valuable are all of the connections that they can set you up with, and just finding the right people to talk to, because I certainly don't know everyone that I need to pull into my team at an individual level. But being confident enough to go ask for people that do know who those people are and make connections, I think is really the best way to go, and to get warm introductions and to talk to people that have worked with those that you need to work with and have a good history and expertise.
Shabnam, anything to add to that? I'm sure that you're the master of understanding the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration. And what advice do you have for people starting out for being good at that and doing it well?
Yeah, no, I think Elizabeth and Carrie covered a lot of the points. I think it's just really being open to putting yourself out there. I think that's the biggest, and I think that's the biggest hurdle to get over, and it's more of a mind game. It's just once you do it once, then it gets easier to be able to talk to folks. But I think to Carrie's point, these accelerators are a good place to not only like connect with potential investors, but also just meet other entrepreneurs, because you can learn through shared experience some of the challenges that they face that you might face in a couple months. So I think those venues are really fantastic.
And anything else, Elizabeth?
Well, so we've touched on the what, the need for collaboration, bringing together people of different skill sets, different backgrounds. But the how, I think, is a really challenging one, especially a lot of people, different backgrounds, and the needing to move really quickly. And so conflict naturally arises. And so that's one of the things that I've tried to help my teams with, is thinking about those softer skills. A lot of times we're not getting those as much in science and academia. And so really encouraging my team to take pauses and zoom out and think about the different functions that you're interacting with, and what are their motivators, what are their responsibilities, and really just thinking about things from different perspectives, and the controlling what you can control. And you're not going to change somebody else's behavior, and it's okay that we all have different responsibilities and motivators, and it's okay that conflict arises. It's how we move through that to decision making. And again, the setting the ego aside, right, it's not that you have to be right. What is the ultimate definition of success, and making sure that that's what's driving us.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is what we used to call situational leadership. It was a term we used a lot in pharma and biotech when I was leading teams. And it's really learning to tailor your interactions to the situation and to individuals and what their strengths are and what they're bringing to the table, but also knowing what they may be lacking and how you can fill that somewhere else, I think is really important. And it sounds like you're very astute at doing that. So that's really great to share.
I will say there's a great book that touches on this topic called Multipliers. If anyone wants to read that, it's fantastic. That basically how, like, in terms of leading teams and how to tailor, like, build upon the strengths of people on your team is one of the key points that they talk about.
Do you remember who wrote that book by any chance? Maybe you can post it in the chat if you can find it. That would be great. I'm sure the people who are listening to us would appreciate that. So, okay, let's look towards the future and think about people who are starting out on their entrepreneurial journey. And maybe we can ask Carrie to speak to advice she would give students who are thinking about entering the Aspire to Innovate program. Elizabeth, you can think about people who are leaving their PhD and looking at their first path. And Shabnam, just general advice to people who are considering entering this field. And if they're just unsure where to start, how do they get started? So we can start with you, Carrie.
Identify someone that's in a position that you're interested in and talk to them. Invite them for a cup of coffee, learn how they got to where they are, what exactly is it that they do, and just show be genuinely interested and curious about what their role is and how they got there. I think that's a great first place to start. From there, if there are opportunities for internships or even just becoming integrated into the community. You know, I've talked about the entrepreneurship community here, not just in Nashville, but Tennessee overall. Like, you don't need to be in a paid position to participate in a lot of those events. And I think just becoming integrated in it and learning more about the community and the ins and outs of biotech and entrepreneurship will be a great starting point. Yeah, again, just any opportunities that you can to go and learn and gain experience is really the first point that I would point people to.
Yeah, I like that. And Elizabeth, perhaps you can speak a bit more about that. And what is the nature of that community here in Nashville? And what are some of those venues for experiencing that?
Yes, so network, reach out to people. Nashville is a very friendly community, right? We've seen this throughout Nashville's history. People banding together to help each other out. People want to help you out, right? And so I do think making it easy for them, if it's inviting them to a cup of coffee at a place close by, to the person you're taking to coffee, is always helpful. But yeah, I think if you are at Vanderbilt, I think the Brett office is an amazing resource. A lot of different directions that they can point you in. We have the Nashville Entrepreneur Center, which was where I got connected with my first venture outside of academia and Axial Healthcare. They are running incubators and accelerator programs. And so it's a place for people across the community to come together. And I think the other thing is taking one introduction and leaving that conversation with who else should I meet with, right? And they're going to give you 3 other people to go and meet with and go and meet with them, right? And so build it out from there, and take advantage of the happy hours and other events where you can connect with a lot of different people.
That sounds really, really important. And I think just learning about that ecosystem here is good. And Shabnam, your ecosystem expands far beyond Nashville. So what advice would you give to someone who's hesitant or unsure about where to start? Where should they first go?
Yes. So a point about the networking piece. I'm gonna do a shameless plug for Thea. So
Go
it's
right
a great,
ahead.
it's a great community. Over 650 women across the country that are part of this community, and everyone is open to being contacted and having those either in person or virtual coffee chats. So definitely check it out. TheaHC.org can meet people through there. There are investors, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders that are part of the community. A point about the networking piece, you're going to meet a lot of people, but I encourage you to try to maintain those connections. It's one thing to meet with them for the first time and talk and then leave it at that. And I admittedly am not always good about this, but trying to maintain that contact. If you are in that person's city, let's say you're visiting New York, try to have just a coffee with them. If you see an interesting article that is relevant to the conversation, share that so that that person can stay top of mind, so that if there's an opportunity that comes up, maybe they'll think of you for that opportunity. And then for those that are a medical student or PhD student and are just trying to kind of dip their toes into the life sciences space, a lot of VC funds have these fellowships, and I participated in some of these. And I mean, they call them fellowships, but they're basically internships that are anywhere from 3 months to a year. And you really start to learn about the biotech ecosystem. And they'll put you on projects, you'll meet entrepreneurs. And so you learn how VC works and how company building works. And so I'm sure our contact information will be shared. And I have a list of a lot of the biotech and life sciences VC funds that have these opportunities. And I'm happy to share those because I think those are really good at helping you learn, and then also, again, network with
Right.
people.
Yeah, I think that sounds amazing. And I haven't really heard about that before or talked about much on campus. So that sounds tremendous.
I'd like to add, I think we'd be doing a disservice if we don't mention the Wondery and the programming for those that are within Vanderbilt's community specifically, and external for that matter. But they've got a ton of entrepreneur programming set in place, as well as interning and consulting, life science consulting type of opportunities. So I encourage the trainee to look there. There are also some clubs. There was one that I started last year, the Vanderbilt Innovation Council, that's specifically for trainees to push different innovation efforts out within the Vanderbilt community again. So I think there are a lot of opportunities, not only within Vanderbilt and regionally, but then, as Shabnam alluded to, some much broader ones as well.
Yeah, and then within our technology group, technology transfer office, we have a new ventures group, and that group is growing. We've just hired another person, and we'll be announcing some high-profile hires in the near future that we're really excited about, and just putting together some great programming there, I think, to help people think about how to spend their ideas out of Vanderbilt and get them in towards the market. And it's just a really exciting time to be here. So there are a couple of questions in the chat that I think are interesting. One is a person asking about, they're on the business side, they have a heart for STEM, but they are not sure how to get into science and research and start impacting in that space. They'd like to give their support, but they don't know quite how to do it. So what advice do any of you have for someone of that background?
So one, there are a lot of podcasts out there. That is an easy way, I think, to tap into a domain that you're less familiar with. And a lot of times those podcasts are translated into layman's terms, right? It's inviting the public in. So I think maybe that's a good way to get up to speed in an area where you have less expertise. And then I would go back to the networking piece. I think, again, going out there and looking for those opportunities to meet people in the space that you don't have the skill set in, and learning from them, I think are two key pieces of advice I'd give.
That's good. And I think, campuses are starting to open their doors more, I think, to business people who are interested. We're doing a life science showcase coming up this summer on campus, and I know we'll be opening that up to people who have an interest in joining and learning about what we're doing on campus, and we'll have industry there as well as academic innovators. And I think events like that would be good for someone on the business side who's interested in getting involved in research more on the life science side. So I think these are all really, really good topics that you all have proposed. I think we've put in the chat the author of the book Multipliers. Let's see if I can get back to that. Liz Wiseman is the author, so refer people to that. So are there any specific questions that you all think we haven't addressed that might be good to talk with our audience about?
Maybe one of the pieces of advice for those who are interested in moving into biotech, but specifically entrepreneurism, is we haven't talked about risk. And I do think that's a key one. I want to be positive and encouraging people to enter into this space. I found it to be incredibly rewarding, but it's really not for everyone. And so I do think that there's some key questions that you're going to want to ask yourself if you want to move into entrepreneurism, and your tolerance for risk is the number one that you need to ask yourself. If you are somebody who likes certainty, entrepreneurism might not be the path for you. There are other ways into biotech. It just might not be an early stage startup or starting your own company, because it is just rife with uncertainty. That is the experience. That is what it is to be an entrepreneur. So I think it's important to call that out.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I can remember back when I left academia and moved into a small biotech company, it was very scary for me at the time. And I remember talking to people who were my mentors and saying, I don't know, I'm really excited about what they're doing. It's my passion for the science. I want to do it, but what if it fails? Where will I go from there? And the advice that I was given was, if you're really good at what you do and you're passionate about it, you'll be able to find something that suits you and that works for you. If this doesn't work, there'll be something else there. So don't be afraid. And that helped me a lot to hear when I was in my early 30s.
Yeah, especially in biotech, there's almost an expectation that things will fail more
That's
likely
right.
than not. And so people understand that. So when you go on to your next opportunity, no one's going to ding you because your prior venture failed. They're going to ask, what did you learn from it? And what are you going to bring to this? I think it's even more valuable if you have failed at something or something didn't work out before.
I think that's right. And I think not a day goes by that you don't read about some new company being formed and they're announcing the CEO, and often they were someone from a company that didn't make it. And sometimes they're from a company that was bought and was very successful. But that experience, learning from something that failed, is often more valuable than what you learned when you were successful. So that's great. Great point.
Yeah, I think to that point, Shabnam, if I recall correctly, the last number that I heard about that was that about 93% of biotech startups fail. So that's a very large number, and it's a very daunting number for sure, but that's all the more reason to lean into those subject matter experts and your network around you to make your way for success.
Yeah, so I think the best thing that you can prepare yourself when you're taking these risks is to have that strong network around you and to continue to foster that throughout your career. So, well, look at the chat, and here's a question that I think is a good one. Here's someone who's had a PhD for a while and has been out of the field and is wanting to get back into the field. Are there internships that are open for someone who's a little further along in their career, not just starting out? So thoughts about that from the group?
Absolutely. So I would say one of the things that we look at a lot is the maturity of people who are coming into the team. And so sometimes if you're coming right out of school, you haven't had all of those life experiences that I think you really need to draw on to be successful in a startup environment. So I actually look at that as an asset, not a hindrance in any sort of way. So I would sell those life experiences as you're talking to others. I think it really comes across as something that will lead to a better experience. Yeah.
And here's another really good question. Carrie, did you have something to say?
I was just going to second that. I think again, it speaks to maturity and lived experience, and being able to manage more than just yourself, which is important when you're on a team. But also I've seen people make complete career switches in their 60s and later in life and go in a completely different direction and be wildly successful. So I wouldn't let that deter you.
So here's a good question for people who are really thinking about jumping into entrepreneurship and navigating the risk, the personal risk. How do you maintain your basic income and healthcare, those kinds of things for the first few years of starting a business or serial businesses if you're doing multiple ones? Any strategies about that from this group?
Well, I will say that my first venture, I worked for 9 months with no income, and so that is tough, and that is the reality for many people who are entrepreneurs. So I think some of the strategies are setting a budget for yourself, and just being really smart about finite resources. And just knowing that that's a sacrifice that you need to make. So just setting expectations, I think is key. And again, setting up a network and talking to those around you in that network who have lived this type of experience before too, right? Where there is a great deal of uncertainty and maybe a limited resources.
Yeah, I like the part about a budget, maybe planning ahead when you're about to jump into something like that and being able to cover your healthcare and knowing that you're going to have to do that for a period of time before you jump into it is really critical. Yeah, and there are questions about compensation and ensuring that you're getting fair and equal compensation. That's a tough one. So thoughts about how to ensure that your compensation is where it should be, places to look and know that what you're asking for is within reason in the right ballpark.
I'll just jump in here and say, first, don't work for free. Know that somebody's taking advantage of you. You should at least get some sort of part of the company and ownership of the company if you're not being compensated by a salary. So that's the first one I would say is just that's a big no. Setting benchmarks and knowing you have the right salary, that's certainly not my field of expertise, but I think do know your worth and that you are providing value and should be compensated accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's great advice and something for everyone to keep in mind at all stages of their careers. Okay, well, I think we have really made this time has gone by so quickly. And so I just want to thank all of you for your insights and your thinking, and to encourage people that have listened in, feel free to reach out to us. You can get our contact through the School of Medicine Basic Sciences, the Lab to Table event, and happy to help and carry on this conversation with those who are interested. And just thank you all so much for your diverse perspectives and for really sharing your hearts and your experience today. It's been really valuable. So I think we'll close and just thank the School of Medicine Basic Sciences for making these kinds of forums available for people to listen to and participate in. They're super.
Thank you.
Right.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.